right. Hello, everybody. And hi. Welcome to another wonderful evening of See and Learn 2019. We do want to say thank you guys for coming and joining us at Long Haul. And if we can give another little wave to the people at Facebook Live. Thank you guys for joining us on Facebook. Yeah. All right. And first off, we do want to give a thank you to our sponsors, specifically Carib Trans, for funding us to be able to go on the Facebook Live and share it with people all around the world. Yeah. And a thank you to Cottage Club for housing our expert while he's out here this week and sharing the knowledge and information with all of you guys. So thank you, Cottage Club. And one more big thank you to all of our sponsors. Without them, this wouldn't be possible, so thank you all for your support. Yeah. And as you guys may know, may not know, we have a raffle going on right now. We're right here next to Miss Emily. $2 per ticket, and for that ticket, you guys could be winning some of these glorious prizes. We have a 2-for-1 certificate for 8 days, 7 nights aboard the Caribbean Explorer 2. Really amazing. We also have a beautiful piece of glass art, which will either be a seahorse and or mermaid by Miss Jo Bean. Oh, it's going to be 2. I'm sorry. You'll get a seahorse and a mermaid by Miss Jo Bean. And we also have Aquamania Adventures, which has donated 3 raffle prizes for us. A sunset sail for 2. 2 round-trip tickets on the Edge to go back and forth from St. Martin, Saba. And we also have a tango dinner cruise for 2. Sorry, guys, thank you. As one of the other prizes. So really amazing stuff. Thank you, Aquamania. We also have a 2-night stay at the Travel Inn. We also have a beautiful handcrafted knife by John. Pretty amazing. We also have 2. If you guys really want to guarantee that you get one, we have 2 for sale in Kokona. So really cool. Quite amazing work that he's done with those knives. We also have a wine gift basket from Shea Booba and 2 round-trip tickets from the the Saba Ferry. And we also have a 2-night stay at Queen's Garden Resort. So some pretty amazing prizes if you guys want to enter. Just $2 for a ticket. We'll get you in that raffle, and it'll be drawn at the end of the month on our closing night on October 27th. Tonight, we got Erik Boman here. He's going to be presenting. And if you guys we want to make sure you guys know, his field activity is tomorrow. So that'll be at 1 p.m. You guys are going to be measuring conch. So it'll be really awesome. And, of course, if you guys come, sustainable cutlery. So you guys can help us. Yeah, woo! Help us cut down on trash here on Saba would be amazing. And, of course, you get to do a really cool field project. So the reason you guys all came tonight to hear our experts speak. So let me give you a nice little introduction on who will be in front stage tonight. Erik Boman was born and raised in Sweden, where he also completed his master's degree in applied ethology and animal biology at Linköping University in 2009. In 2010, he moved to Statia, where he worked in the marine park and for the sea turtle program. Later, he started working as a data monitoring officer and then became a PhD candidate at, I might butcher this, but I'm going to try, Wageningen. All right, that was kind of bad, but it's all right. Got 2 thumbs up from the Dutch. Thank you. And Wageningen University with a focus on the biology and ecology of queen conch. After finishing his PhD, Erik recently took over as director of Statia's National Parks Foundation, SNAPA, which is basically like Saba's Conservation Foundation here on this island. Tonight, he will be presenting on current and future challenges for queen conch. Please give a warm welcome to Erik Boman.
Thank you very much.
Oh, you gotta point this way.
Oh. Yeah. So, tonight, some of you were here the last time I was here, and I know you're thinking, thank God we're finally gonna know more about snails. And the rest of you, well, you're in for a treat, because we're gonna do snails all the way. So tonight, I'm gonna talk about queen conch, And I'm gonna talk about the current and future challenges of Queen Conch, what we know currently, what we need to know, and what we can do about it. So, this is the queen of snails, the supermodel of gastropods, the Queen Conch. So, first of all, I'm going to give you a small introduction to Queen Conch. Then, I'm going to talk about the current status and current challenges, future challenges, what we need to know, and then what we can do about it. So, Queen Conch, as I said, is a large marine snail. It can be found all through the Caribbean, including Saba Banks, Statia, and the blue is its distribution range. So pretty much the entire Caribbean, Gulf of Mexico, up to even Bermuda and the most northern tip of Brazil. So it can be found all through the Caribbean. It has a high cultural and economical value. It was also fished and used by the native Caribs. And it's one of the most important fisheries in the Caribbean. It sustains roughly 25,000 fishermen, half-time and full-time, and it's often combined with a lobster fishery. So if they go fish conch and they see a lobster, they'll grab it. And what can you do with conch? Well, you can do a lot with conch, but here's a few things. You have jewelry. So this right here is a Queen Conch pearl. So every so often, like the oysters, they create a pearl. It's very valuable, but deteriorates quite quickly. I never seen one myself, so the frequency is maybe 1 in 10,000. You can also play music with it. This is a conch with inscriptions by the native Caribs. So they used it for also other purpose than food. However, the main use of conch is obviously the white meat for different kind of dishes. I'm sure many of you have tried conch fritters or conch ceviche, etc. And this is the main purpose why we fish conch. So Queen Conch is you mainly find it from 0 to 35 meters. The adults prefer algae flats and hard bottoms like the top picture over there, while the juveniles are found in mainly seagrass, native seagrass, which are usually close to shore in coastal areas. And native seagrass beds are very important for Queen Conch, especially for juveniles. So, as I said before, it's been heavily exploited throughout the entire Caribbean, and even to the point where we've seen a decrease in population sizes in many locations. And even in some areas like Florida and Guadeloupe, it's been severely overfished. And even though the fishery in Florida has been closed for 30 years, the population has not recovered. This is the landings of Queen Conch from the 1960s up to current level. So in the bottom here is years. So it starts in 1960, goes up to 2017 roughly. There was a peak in Queen Conch landings around 1990, 1995. Since then, the population or the landings decreased. And this is basically catch. So catches of Queen Conch increased rapidly up to 1996. The reason why they had such a steep increase is because we kind of invented scuba diving. And then it became a hell of a lot easier to catch Queen Conch. Then the population kind of took a nosedive. It's more difficult to get Queen Conch, but it stabilized a bit recently. So, what are the challenges Queen Conch are facing now? We have heavy exploitation, fishing, habitat degradation, and invasive species seagrass. For you that went on my wife's presentation on Monday, you know about this. And this picture here, these are mountains of conch shells. So they discovered entire islands made of conch, basically, built up out of conch shells. When they started digging, poking around in the sand, they found that entire island was just built up of a conch, which is quite interesting. So, why are conch vulnerable to heavy exploitation? Well, they have a couple of life history characteristics which makes them vulnerable. These are a few of them. Slow moving, planktonic phase, and density dependent survival and reproduction. We'll go into each of them. So first of all, slow moving is like, duh, they're a snail. Obviously, they're gonna be slow. However, I know a Yumi over here know that they can actually move quite a bit. But compared to a diver, they don't have a chance. So they're super easy to catch. They're not adapted to human predation. The only defense is the thick shell. And, well, they're no match for a hammer and a chisel, basically. The planktonic phase. So the larvae of conch, after they hatch, they free flow in the water column. So they're dependent on currents, large currents, small currents, to take them to their next location. And these are the general water currents in the Caribbean. There are also finer gyres and water retention patterns in this, but all these currents restrict movement of larvae with distance. So the further you are, the less likely you are to be able to settle. And the consequence is that some areas which have been severely overfished do not get new influx of larvae, like the Florida Keys or the Florida in general. That's why, well, the hypothesis is that there is no new larvae coming in to resettle these areas. Density-dependent survival. So for juveniles, basically, if there's a lot of you, it's less likely that you get eaten. But there's also one caveat. If there's a lot of you, there's less food to eat. So there has to be a balance between surviving and growing. But there needs to be a lot of juveniles for them to have a good chance of survival. And similarly, with the adults, the more the merrier. They are slow moving, thus they need to have a lot of conch in a small area to be able to find a mate. So if there's not any around, it's not gonna happen. And the magic number is 100 conch per hectare. That's where you have guaranteed mating. So anything below this number, we will get back to this, so remember this number, people. I will quiz you. Anything above it is great. So, habitat degradation. Why are queen conch vulnerable to habitat degradation? So all the adults and the juveniles require different kind of habitat, but the common denominator is high water quality and high water or quality of habitat in general. So if they don't have a high quality of both of these things, they are not going to be able to survive. So they're sensitive to human-based activities, such as sedimentation, eutrophication, which is the increase of nutrient in the habitat, also pollutants and mechanical impact. And what happens during sedimentation is that a large quantity of particles runs into these habitats. And what happens is that it has a negative impact on the seagrass, which the conch need to survive. It reduces the light availability for the seagrasses, which are light dependent, so they degrade, and also the bottom composition can change from a sort of coarse sand to a more silt habitat. And as conch, I don't know if you felt a conch, but it's quite heavy. So if it has a silt or mud bottom, it's just gonna sink into it, and it's not gonna be able to move around. So that's an issue. Eutrophication similarly has a negative impact on its habitat. So if you increase the nutrients in the environment, it has a negative impact on native seagrass species. But it can have a positive impact on invasive seagrass species. And also, more nutrients, more activity for algae and such, so there's less oxygen available in the water, which is negative for the larvae, which needs oxygen to hatch and survive. So that's a negative impact on the survival of larvae as well. Pollutants. So what's the issue with pollutants? Well, zinc has been linked to mating failure also in Florida. I'm not going to bash too much on Florida. And also antifouling, which is mainly TBT, has also effect on mating behavior. And it can cause imposex, which is basically the conch has both male and female sex organs. I found one of these in Statia. I don't know if it's because we have a lot of tankers going by, but in many areas this TBT is banned, but in the Caribbean you can still find it, which is, well, not great, to be honest.
So, just to explain to some people who aren't boat owners, so that's
Yeah.
the bottom paint that people put on?
Yes, that's a
And
black bottom
causing-
paint.
it's effectively causing birth defects, that you're
Yeah.
getting the dual sex organs?
Yeah. So the reason why you want to have antifouling on your boat, which is this stuff underneath, is because you don't want a lot of creatures growing there. Thus, the more poison you put on it, the less likely something is to grow there. But it also affects a lot of other organisms which you didn't intend to kind of mess with. So this is a really obvious one. Mechanical impact, anchoring, dredging, all of that stuff destroys the native seagrass beds and other habitats conch likes to live in. You have a huge anchor on top there, just going through a seagrass bed. In the bottom picture, you have a boat just plowing through a seagrass field. So, yeah. This has been linked to a reduce in conch densities in a close-by island, St. Kitts. On a very clear day, you can go up to Mount Scenery and have a look at it. Somewhere over there. The second island over. So, the invasive seagrass, or invasive species. What's the issue? I'm not going to talk too lengthy about this because I'm sure all of you listen to my wife's presentation and you remember everything. But the invasive seagrass came into the Caribbean in 2002, or at least that's when it was discovered, in Grenada, and since then it's spread throughout the eastern and southern Caribbean. It's up to Puerto Rico now, and I think even to Colombia. This seagrass species, the invasive one, has a negative impact on native seagrass, which is important to conch. We also, the native seagrass, as I said before, is very important to conch. It provides mainly food and protection. And what we found is that conch like to feed on the sediment in between the native seagrass. And the issue with the invasive seagrass that it grows so densely that most likely it prevents the conch or juvenile conch to feed in between the seagrass. So it provides less opportunities to feed, thus lowering the growth rates of conch or juvenile conch, which is negative for the regrowth of the entire population. So if you are a conch in invasive seagrass, you probably feel like this. So future challenges, like this wasn't enough, we still gonna have issues with the invasive seagrass as it spreads through the Caribbean. And I'm sure that when it spreads to the big fisheries like Jamaica, Honduras, they're gonna panic a bit because we don't know enough about it to really predict what's gonna happen. But on top of that, we have some interesting stuff happening like climate change, and that can also impact conch and provide challenges. So, climate change will cause changes not only due to the increase in temperature, but the ocean will also become more acid, and water currents are likely to change. So, the question is, how does this affect conch populations? Well, the answer is potentially in a lot of ways. A lot of interesting and also scary ways. So what are the consequences of increased temperature? Well, one issue is that reproductive season is regulated by temperature. And this is a graph showing that the more variation you have in temperature, the shorter the amount of, or the shorter reproductive season. So if you have a lot of variation in sort of in the Bahamas, so the temperature is cold in the winter and warm in the summer, the reproductive season will be much narrower. Down here in Statia and Seba, etc., and if you go even further down, where you have a more average high temperature, the reproductive season is much longer. So, if temperatures increase, this will affect the reproductive season. So potentially, we've seen also that in very high, or in years where we have very high temperature, conch can basically mate all year round. And you think, well, what's the issue with that? Sounds pretty good. Well, the problem is that we have closed season as a management action to prevent people from catching conch in the season where they aggregate and mate. And if the reproductive season mostly occurs outside of this, it means we have less protection for conch. So we have to juggle around there. Also, extreme temperatures can cause conch to stop mating. Basically, if it's too hot, it's not going to happen. Too cold, it's not going to happen. It's a perfect balance there. We're not sweating too much and not freezing your butt off. So, additional consequences for a queen conch. So, as temperatures increase, the metabolic processes increase and growth rates can increase. And this is a good thing, because if the growth rates increase, which means will mean that a juvenile conch can get to an adult conch size faster, which is positive for the population. However, if you have a conch at this temperature, it will go to this size. Over there, it's much hotter, the conch can grow to that size faster. However, if we want to grow to this size, you have to eat that much. And if you want to grow to that size over there, you have to eat this much. So, growth rates can increase, which can be positive. However, only if there's enough food. So if you don't have enough food, you can't grow to an increased size or grow faster even. And if the temperature is extreme, above the natural range, they're not going to be able to grow faster either. However, we do not know if conch can possibly adapt to an increased temperature. So the natural temperature range might be able to increase. So we don't know that. So, acidification. Question, first of all, how does the ocean become more acid and why do we care? So what happens is that carbon dioxide goes in to the ocean, reacts with water, HO2, and create carbonic acid. That is simplified version of how the ocean becomes more acid. To this, conch and many other creatures, they need something called carbonate to create their shell. Corals, like this one, needs it to create its exoskeleton. Crabs need it also. So what happens is that this carbonic acid reacts with carbonate and creates something called bicarbonate. So basically, the damn acid steals carbonate, which is an issue, because now conch and other creatures, they have to convert bicarbonate to carbonate to be able to use it to create their shell. So this is an issue. This requires more energy, which it could have used for other things. So there are two options here. Option one is You spend more energy on building the same density shell, but then you have less energy to spend on other things such as growing and mating, which is not good. Option 2, you spend the same amount of energy, but just make a weaker shell. And the consequences of option 1 is that, well, you have smaller conch, less eggs, which is negative for the regrowth of the population. And option 2 is that you're more susceptible to predation. So if you have a weaker shell, which is basically your only protection against these guys, that's gonna suck, to put it plainly. So these are the most frequent predators of conch. So you have tiger shark, eagle ray, nurse shark, and spiny lobster. So I know this sounds a bit depressing, and maybe some of you are asking, Jesus Christ, why did I attend this presentation? And some of you might even feel like this. But don't despair. It's not all bad. So today, we know that the conch is not threatened by extinction. We have enough of them at this moment. But locally, it's a different story. And we know that under the right circumstances, populations can recover. I will give an example, which is close to home, in a few minutes. And also, we know that there are sustainable fisheries of conch in the Caribbean. For example, Statia, next door. Clear day, look that way, first island. So, what is it that we need to know? Basically, we need to know how and what causes conch population to increase and decrease. So know that at the moment, but we need to know that for the current changes as well. So a population, if the analogy is that this bathtub is, with the water in here, is the population. So we need to know what causes this level to either increase and decrease. For populations, the inflow is maybe caused by births and immigration, and the outflow, deaths and immigration. However, adult conch do not really immigrate, or where they are, I mean, they're gonna move around a bit, but they're not really going anywhere. So for conch, it's only really births and deaths. So if you increase the output, the population will, or the water level, population size will lower. If you decrease the inflow, the same thing occurs. So we need to know what causes these things to increase and decrease. Exactly. For example, regarding the invasive seagrass and climate change, these are the things we have to figure out. Today, we don't know exactly. We know that the invasive seagrass can have a negative impact on the growth of juvenile conch, but we need to know how much compared to what it is today. We need to know that if conch can grow faster with temperature rises, will that have a positive effect? And how much is it compared to the negative effects of all the other things? Unfortunately, well, fortunately for me and others, this will require long-term research as conditions will change. So I will have a job if someone is willing to pay me for a long time. So some changes may be positive, but a lot of them, unfortunately, are more likely to be negative. So what can we do about this? Well, we can improve the conditions that affect births and deaths. Sounds pretty simple, right? Well, this requires us, for example, to reduce sedimentation, to have a great water management system, to have a good system where you do not have a lot of water flowing into the ocean with a rapid pace that brings a lot of silt and other sediment with them. we can remove the roaming animals, which also lets the water just flow off the hill. I know on Seba you have a problem with this, but I don't think you have as big a problem as we do in Statia. So this is a big problem in Statia for sure. We can also prevent and reverse eutrophication. We can treat our sewage. We can remove the roaming animals. These are also a cause of eutrophication. On Statia, we don't really have a sewage treatment at all. I don't know if you have one in Seba. If you are, you're lucky. There are, not really. Yes, maybe. Natural. Yeah. Okay, so the natural treatment of sewage is semi-good. So these actions are not only going to be positive for conch, but all the other animals living in these habitats, such as corals and spiny lobster, etc. So these are good for not only the conch, these action, but for all the coastal habitats and the creatures inhabiting them. Furthermore, we can adapt management of conch. So, basically, we need to find out how many deaths a population can tolerate. Under the normal circumstances, today that figure is roughly 8% of the adult population per year can be removed without affecting the population. But in the future, it might be only 7 or 6 or 5, and we need to know that. And this depends on a lot of things, so such as growth rate, natural predation, etc. And how do we regulate the amount of this? You might say, well, it's gonna be a hell of a thing to regulate this guy. I mean, I dare any one of you to swim down and tell him that he can't catch any conch anymore. But luckily, these guys aren't the problem. The real predator is this guy. And if you are 80s action movie geek, you get the reference. And if you're not, well, sad day. Basically, we have to regulate ourselves because we are the real predators of conch. I can't give you a percentage, but of adult conch, we probably remove maybe close to 99% of all adult conch when it comes to actual predation. When it comes to juveniles, completely different story, then it's natural predation, but adults, that's us. That one is on us. What else? We can take an ecosystem approach. So not only protect the species, but the entire ecosystem. And also, this is beneficial for so many other creatures. Sounds simple, but with politics involved, it's not always simple. So, finally, a bit positive sort of ending to the whole story. For some of you who may not know, but I assume that all of you do, out there, somewhere, is the Seba Bank, one of the largest atolls in the world. On the Seba Bank, you had a huge conch fishery up until 1996. Boats from all over the Caribbean came huge vessels and sent out smaller vessels, caught conch, brought it into Seba in huge containers, shipped it all over the world. The bank was severely overfished at that point, but in 1996, from what I believe is local pressure, the Coast Guard shut the fishery down completely. So from 1996 onward, there's been no conch fishery on the bank. Large scale, I'm sure a few here and there, but not any significant amount. So the last survey around 2012, 2014 showed that we have a large amount of queen conch on the Seba Bank. And this survey was performed by the Seba Conservation Foundation together with Wageningen University, which was me at the time. And we showed on a lot of places on the bank we found densities of conch that will ensure that mating can occur. And if you listen carefully, you know what number is significant here. I heard 100. 100 for, yeah. So everything that's red and deep red are areas on the bank where you have a lot of conch. And that's where they can mate freely without any problem. So that's very, very promising. And the overall density on the bank is also over under 100 conch per hectare, which is not something that you find in a lot of places in the Caribbean. And we have roughly 14 million adult conch on the Saba Bank, which is a lot. And more than 35% of all locations we looked at had very high densities. So it's most likely the Saba Bank is the single largest population of untouched population of queen conch, at least in the Eastern Caribbean. So it has potentially a very valuable source of larvae for not only the bank itself, but also Saba, Statia, and many other areas in the Caribbean, or at least in the Eastern Caribbean. So queen conch can recover under the right circumstances, so there is still hope for them. The end. Questions? Yes, first.
A few years ago, I can't remember where we were, but we visited a conch fishery.
Okay.
Have they been successful at all at reintroducing conch into the natural habitat?
So the
It was a
question.
nursery, what did I say? Nursery, sorry.
So the question was, are queen conch artificial nurseries successful? Well, they can be. The problem is that you can but most effectively take eggs from sort of natural grown conch and then in artificial pools, hatch them, grow them to a certain size, and then release them. They can be successful if you release them into a habitat which is sort of healthy enough for conch to survive. If you take conch, baby conch, and just throw them anywhere, guaranteed they're gonna die. So there are also factors which we don't really know why or how they work, that in some areas you will find a lot of conch, and then you find nothing in an area which seems perfectly fine, and then you will find them again. So if you're lucky, you can make a difference. But for example, in Florida, they have not been able to do it. Yes?
What do you attribute Statia's success as a conch fishery to? Is there real control methods in? Is it just the habitat's better, or why is it so successful?
So the question was, what do I attribute the success of the sustainable fishery in Statia? There are a few factors. One, the conch are really deep, naturally, from like 20 meters downwards, which means that it's quite difficult to catch them. Two, there's only like 3 guys that really do it. And another factor is they only pick large adult conch because the small ones have a thinner shell, thinner lip, and if they grab that one, they can cut their hand. And they don't like that. So they sort of self-regulate by only taking the ones that are really mature. So the other ones are left alone. So it's kind of self-regulating by a very small population, a small fishery. If you would have 10 other guys doing it, it would no longer be sustainable. But we are slowly but surely making sure that we have a total allowed catch. So it doesn't matter if 20 fishermen come in or there's only one fisherman, will only be allowed to catch a certain amount of conch, which corresponds to a certain percentage of the total population. So will be better regulated, but they kind of self-regulate as well. So several things. Yes.
Have any studies been done on natural predators like horse conch? Have they increased, which would be, if they increased in some areas, that would be a predation that would be hard to evaluate. But that is an important enemy.
Yeah.
Has any study been done about
Natural predators?
Natural predators like other snails. Yeah.
So the question was, has any studies been made about natural predation, such as other snails? Yeah. At the Triton conch, for example, is a predator of conch. In very few locations do you have a high density of other predatory snails, such as the Triton conch, that will actually have a big impact on the queen conch population. Octopi and spiny lobsters are probably more ferocious predators on juvenile conch. And very high densities of spiny lobster could potentially reduce densities of juvenile conch. So, yeah.
And adult conch that would be predated on by horse conch and large, other large conch.
So, adult conch, queen conch, basically the only real enemies are nurse sharks, octopi, and the odd tiger shark and eagle ray, and other stingrays. But nurse sharks can suck the conch straight out of the shell. A tiger shark really needs to bite through the shell. So, but the predation is really low on adult conch. It's not really significant. When they reach a certain thickness in shell, at a certain age, it's basically, the predator you saw there, that is an issue. Yes?
Basic information about the life cycle, like how long do they need on the eggs?
So, the information or the question was, can you give me some basic information about the life cycle? So, when the egg hatch, an egg mass can sustain millions of, or can contain millions of eggs. When they hatch, they drift in a water column for between 14 to 28 days with a maximum of 60 days. Then they drift with the currents, they settle. When they settle, they dig down into the substrate, and they stay there until maybe they're 5-6 centimeters. Then they emerge, move into preferably seagrass habitats. When they're like 3 years old, they start going a bit deeper. At 3.5 to 4 years old, they become mature. And if you leave them alone, they can live to roughly 30 years. So they can reproduce from 3-4 years, or 3.5-4 years, up to 30. But it's possible as the conch shell continuously thickens. So really old conch have less space inside of them, which means that they probably have less space for gonads, so less space to produce eggs. So really old conch are probably less sort of fecundant, so they produce less eggs. Raven.
So, to what extent does the conch juveniles really rely on the seagrass beds, and how does this coexist with the fact that also their habitat range could increase due to climate change?
So the question was, how do the conch sort of rely on their seagrass as a habitat? Yeah, to what extent? And how can they benefit from climate change?
Their habitat range could also increase due to climate change, except if there's no seagrass, then, well, maybe it would not.
I mean, so mainly the seagrass will provide food and shelter. Native seagrasses can be from, if you know manatee grass and turtle grass, Monday's lecture, people, it can be fairly high. So probably it can provide quite a good protection for the conch. And in between the space in the sediment, they find diatoms to feed on. So they probably can feed on the actual seagrass as well, the small creatures that live on the seagrass, not the seagrass per se, likely. So it is very sort of valuable for them. If they are in an open sand habitat, they don't have any kind of protection, and also the substrate is more fluent. So the diatoms living in sort of pure sand are likely to be moved around more, and it's more difficult for these diatoms to settle and reproduce. So that is sort of why it's important for them. When it comes to climate change and how that will affect seagrass, I don't think it will have a positive impact on native seagrass in the Caribbean. The invasive seagrass will continue to spread. But if you ask me how climate change is going to affect natives or the invasive seagrass, the honest answer is I don't know. Maybe positive, maybe negative. But it seems to be spreading really rapidly, and yeah, it's an area of concern for sure.
Does this Seba Bank picture with all the conch correlates with seagrass beds? How is that?
So the funny thing is that juvenile conch do not necessarily have to have native seagrass or seagrass at all. And in the picture, I'm going to go back. There. These dots are only densities of adult conch. What we've seen is that juveniles tend to stay in the middle, and as they grow older, they move further to the edge of the bank. And the reason they do this, we hypothesize that on large bank like this, basically water flows like this and then goes around the edge of the bank. So water flow will be higher around the edges and slower or lower in the middle. And if you want to have a chance of spreading your larvae far and wide, you make sure that you position yourself in an area where there's a lot of water flow. At least that's what we think. We have to do more studies to confirm this. Yeah, but we have not found, maybe recently you have, you may have to correct me if I'm wrong, but at least on all the video surveys, so all this was done by video service, we did not find any seagrass. Have you found any? The answer is no. So you can still have a ton of conch even if you don't have seagrass. But they do love seagrass and are primarily associated with native seagrass in a lot of regions in the Caribbean. But general algae fields can also potentially provide the same kind of protection, and if it's not too dense, provide the same sort of space for them to feed in the substrate. Ayumi.
Why is the invasive seagrass not as tasty for the queen conch? Did I understand that right?
So the question was, why is the invasive seagrass not tasty for the queen conch? Likely, no seagrass is tasty for queen conch. So what they feed on is actually what's in between the seagrass, and potentially in some cases also seagrass detritus, which is partially broken down leaves of seagrass. But the issue with the invasive seagrass is that it grows so densely that you don't have the chance, if you're a conch, to reach the bottom. Alternatively, as it grows so densely, it outcompetes diatoms in their sort of struggle to get any kind of light, so they can't grow there, so they're just less food. We don't know exactly what's the issue there, but my wife is on it. She'll get back to you. Yes, second question.
I know you did some DNA on the queen conch, right?
Yeah.
In the Caribbean. Did you see any genetics here on the silverback coming from somewhere else?
So the question was, You have done some genetics, right? And have you seen if Queen Kong come in from anywhere else to the Saber Bank? And the question is, no, we couldn't see that. So basically, the first genetics paper that we published was so sort of at such a high level that we can only see what areas were more or less connected to each other. But we could not look at the fine scale patterns of larvae moving into what area. That's why I say potentially the Queen Conch on Saber Bank could be very important for the region. But I can't tell you for sure. I will get back to you on that one. Yes?
Do you know if the rising ocean temperatures has changed the range of habitat when you push it further north, or is that something you're expecting with the rising ocean temperatures?
So the question was the rising ocean temperature, if it can push the habitat further north and potentially south. Potentially. It has a northern limit up at Bermuda. Yes, potentially. But yeah, that's sort of speculation. I wouldn't say it's unlikely that it would change in such a way that Queen Conch were gonna be sort of favored by it. Probably not. We had one more, yeah, there.
A while ago, a long while ago, I saw a conch chase.
Conch chase?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's
One-
exciting.
Yeah, it was not that fast. And one was clearly jumping away, and one was clearly following it. Is that pre-mating behavior?
So she saw one conch jumping or leaping after another conch. It is possibly that it was a male conch wanting to engage in behavior which the female conch did not want to engage in. But that is pure speculation. It is nothing that we have connected to sort of a mating ritual or any kind of mating behavior. So yeah, maybe they were playing tag. I have no idea. Yeah, I don't know. We had something over here.
The effect of temperature on reproduction, is it sort of like a graph that goes soup and then down, like at a specific temperature all of a sudden reproduction drops off?
Yeah.
Or is it more of a gentle line?
So when the question was the rise of temperature, when it affects mating behavior, if it was a sort of drop or a gentle slope going down. What they have observed is that when the temperature reaches above a certain degree, I might be lying, I think in Puerto Rico it was 30.1 degree Celsius, it just shut down. So it's probably that if it goes above a certain threshold, they just stop. So it might be a very sort of fine line. That's, well, what we observed so far, but it needs better investigation. And as we have extreme temperatures more and more often, it is likely that these sort of full stop in mating will occur more and more frequently.
How much of the invasive is going to set back? And then also, as far as, this is for Anna, it's in Iliad where it's native, are there any costs?
So, the question was, how much of the invasive seagrass is found on the Saber conch? And the answer is we haven't found any. We haven't found any seagrass whatsoever. And yeah, hopefully we will not find any. But I mean, yeah, it's just a matter of time, unfortunately. And as the Saber Bank, so Saber Bank is at its shallowest point around 14, 15 meters, and then you have a huge area of 20, 30 meters, 30, 40 meters, and then on the outskirts it slopes down 50, 60, etc. Native seagrass species are usually not found in this depth range. However, the invasive seagrass can be found in these ranges. So for the invasive seagrass, this is potentially a huge area where it can grow and spread. So that's a bit of a concern. The second one was, are there any conch in or on the east coast of Israel? No. Not like this. Yeah, well, yeah. When she visited, they didn't know. I'm sure there are conch in the Pacific, but probably not that occur in the same sort of take up the same niche as our conch.
You mentioned that in the juvenile stage they eat diatoms.
Yeah.
What do they eat at the other stages of life?
So when they become sub-adults and adults, they probably still eat a lot of diatoms. But likely they can feed on more filamentous algae, microalgae, and also certain cyanobacteria. But some cyanobacteria are poisonous, so it's probably sort of a species, depending on the species. But it's not well studied, so we have to do more investigations.
So the population seems to have recovered over the past 25 years or so. Is it likely that eventually they're going to be like overtaking the bank and with reopening fisheries around the bank?
So the question was, the population of conch seemed to have recovered in the last 20-25 years. And will there be a point where they will take over the bank and become sort of so plentiful that they will become an issue and that we should reopen a fishery? The answer is no, they will not be sort of at a point where we have to go and remove some of them. Naturally, that will be self-regulating. As they're not really competing with any other species for that space, it's not an issue. When it comes to opening a fishery, theoretically, you could have a fishery on the bank. However, if you ask me for advice, I would say that may not be a great idea. And the reason is the depth. So the bank is deep. What's gonna happen is that you're gonna have people going down. They're gonna start catching conch. They're gonna use scuba and hookah. They're gonna go really deep, and people are gonna get bent. They're gonna die, and you're gonna have, people dying on the bank. Basically, for a bit of conch meat, and I'm not sure. For me, it wouldn't be worth it, but if you can develop a method where you don't have to dive and you don't catch a bunch of turtles, etc., then you can definitely have a small scale. 8%, which of 14 million is still a hell of a lot of conch, which you could catch sustainably. Raven.
Is there any estimate at how far the larvae of the conch are planktonic and how far they can go?
So the question was, what information we have on how far a long conch larvae can travel? Potentially hundreds and hundreds of miles. However, recent studies with the genetic studies that I've been part of, but I wasn't sole or the lead on that research, have showed that the further you go, the less likely the larvae is to end up there. So with distance, your chances of settling somewhere really far decreases. And what we do find in the Caribbean that we have a lot of local retention. So there's a lot of water currents, gyres, etc., that retain the larvae quite close to your own, or where the adult released or spawned. So they have the potential of traveling really far, but likely they won't travel that far. But I mean, from Statia to Saba, etc., that's not far at all. But likely these larvae are not going to end up in the Bahamas or in Honduras, etc. St. Croix is really close. So, very likely. But then we really have to dig into deeper in the genetics and find really fine scale markers that can show us where they go. But it would be very interesting. All right, I don't see any more hands, so, oh, one more, sorry. The question was, I said that the conch did not recover in Guadeloupe. What is the theory behind it? So hopefully what I said was the conch is not recovered in Florida. It is overfished in Guadeloupe, and the reason why they're not recovering in Guadeloupe is because they are catching them in Guadeloupe. So the main export of conch is the US market and the French. So they are really good at catching conch, and that is why you have very low conch population on the French islands, basically. Thank you. There you go.
Another round of applause for Erik for his wonderful presentation. Thank you, Erik. Okay, now we have a few upcoming events for the end of this week. Tomorrow, as we mentioned, Erik has his field project, 1 p.m. at Fort Bay Harbor. We can arrange a taxi for you at 1:45. And then also tomorrow we have a double field project day. So we have a red-billed tropic bird hike with Hannah Madden, which taxi will be leaving shortly before 4. So if you want to be like one of our groupies and be hardcore and do the dive and then the hike, you're more than welcome to. Then on Friday, we have another presentation at Queen's Gardens by our tropic bird expert, Hannah Madden, who I believe is somewhere in the back. Yep, there we go. And then on Saturday, we have an orchid hike with Jim Ackerman, who is also somewhere in the back, I believe. That hike will be starting at 8 a.m., not 9 a.m., as was previously posted, so it'll be a little cooler for you guys to walk during. And we would like to thank all of our sponsors, particularly Long Haul, for hosting us. Thank you. Please stick around for dinner and drinks afterwards. Also, thank Prince Bernhard Culture Funds, and we'd also like to thank the Saba government, and as always, Carib Trans. And then we'd also like to thank all of you for coming. So thank you so much. Facebook fans, thanks again. And have a wonderful night.
Miami is known as an international community and the hub of trade and logistics for the Caribbean and Americas. A leader in the freight logistics industry, Carib Trans has served the Caribbean region for more than 30 years, with a footprint that has grown from one island to now serving the majority, as well as Central and South America. Carib Trans is an NVOCC, a non-vessel operating common carrier, meaning it has the same responsibilities as a shipper without owning the vessels or planes. Its primary customers, individuals who ship clothing, electronics and other personal items, and occasionally cars.
Most of the stuff that they're sending is because they don't get it there. So for us to provide it on two services, air and ocean, we can give it a choice of how fast you want it. So if you want it really fast, we're going to send it by air, you're going to have it next day, sometimes even the same day.
That on-time service has been the key to Carib Trans' success, whether shipping by air or by sea. The company moves about 5,000 TEUs of freight each year, more than any NVOCC in the region. And since it joined the Saltchuk family of transportation companies a couple of years ago, Carib Trans can offer customers even more shipping options.
Other NVOCCs, they depend on other shipping lines that are not part of their family. So they need to rely on whether they're going to sell or not, whether they are late or not. It doesn't happen to us because it's part of our family of companies. We control the service that we give.
Sí, buenos días, por favor, con Diana.
Quality service is what keeps customers coming back. Customers are treated like family, and when they leave to research competitors, it doesn't usually last long.
They have left and they have come back because they've said that, nobody does it better than Carib Trans. So because of that relationship.
That exceptional service includes consolidation. Customers can have freight sent here and stored for free for up to a month, then consolidated and shipped on to the islands and Americas, a perk for the region's growing small business market. Puerto Rico is an expanding market for Carib Trans, about the size of Connecticut and rich in history and culture. Puerto Rico is home to many pharmaceutical manufacturers, as well as a thriving tourism industry for which Carib Trans moves raw materials and supplies. But serving small businesses is still the company's bread and butter here in San Juan. Businesses like Caldera Café, a local coffee company. Owner Alfredo Rodriguez started growing coffee beans at his mountain farm about 20 years ago. He recently ordered a variety of new equipment for his farm and shop. He uses Carib Trans because it consolidates shipments, which cuts down on the number of times he has to pay the Puerto Rico import tax.
Not many companies want to do that. They want only big cargoes and maybe half container or full containers, but they don't want to consolidate because it's more difficult.
Turning challenges into opportunities is what Carib Trans does, and that includes helping to grow small businesses like Caldera Café by taking the hassle out of shipping.
We can be a gateway to expand their business in the Caribbean and back to the U.S. Wherever they can sell their products, we are also going to be a partner for them.
That customer dedication has made Carib Trans what it is today. Now, as part of a larger family with more transportation resources, Carib Trans hopes to grow beyond its current market, offering services to additional Latin American ports and eventually Europe and Asia. But even when it becomes a global logistics company, Carib Trans wants to stay true to its roots, always providing personalized, reliable customer service and a commitment to the communities it serves.